I would like to introduce Megha Pappachen. Summer is a PhD student of comparative politics and political theory at Northwestern University. She's an organizer in Chicago with the Party for Socialism and Liberation, and she's engaged in struggles around police brutality, gentrification, and anti-imperialism. Her research is grounded in Marxist and feminist theory, social reproduction theory, post-colonial and queer theory, and the history of the Global South. And she's written for Liberation School and Breaking the Chains magazine. Summer's speech is titled, "Did Marx Forget About the Woman? Housework and Reproduction in Marx's Capital." And it's about the invisible role that housework plays in the capitalist system. She brings to the fore the many ways in which capital offers a framework to carefully theorize reproductive work, such as raising children, cleaning bathrooms, cooking dinner, emotional labor, sexual labor, and so on. Work which is overwhelmingly performed by working women all around the world. And she adopts an internationalist perspective when imagining the woman, and argues that Marx helped us understand the full scale of a woman's economic contributions to capitalism. And not only that, but he also enabled generations of women to understand our contribution to the revolution, which will ultimately overthrow capital, the very source of our double exploitation. Please welcome Summer.
Thank you, Patricia. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Summer, and my talk today is about something that's very close to my own life, and that is probably close to literally everyone's life on this call, because it's about social reproduction. And when Marxists say social reproduction, we are referring to the hours and hours and hours of time that working people around the world spend in their homes performing essential labor that is unpaid, but also completely necessary to our employers and to capitalism at large, but also just to humanity. This work includes cooking dinner, cleaning after cooking dinner, washing bathrooms, showering, getting ready, putting on makeup for some people. But it also, most importantly, probably includes raising children and all that goes into that emotionally and physically every day. For a lot of people, social reproduction also means nursing yourself when you're sick, or caring after elderly or disabled family members, younger siblings, when you yourself might be at a young age. So it covers and names a really big part of the lives of working people around the world. And it essentially is its definition would be everything that goes into replenishing a worker's basic needs so that they can arrive to work the next day and basically replenish their labor power, to use Marxist terms for that. And when it comes to social reproduction as a category, before I get into the actual talk, it also includes things that are outside of the home, of course, like education and the transportation industry that help you get from one place to another. But the thing about housework and domestic work specifically is that it is so isolated to individual private homes and is so gendered and also invisible, because it is never thought of as labor by the capitalist government or culture in general. So, like I said, this work is really gendered, and that's something I'm centering in our talk today, because as wives, mothers, daughter-in-laws, and sisters, it's normal for proletarian women to not only go outside in the day and work and earn a wage, but then to come back home and start a second shift, is how it's often called. So the point I want to make is not just that this is so bad and so exploitative, but that there's also a history here. And it is a history of the origin of class society that predates capitalism and predates feudalism. And it's a history that was also formed in step with the invention or the origin of the oppression of women, which hasn't actually always been around, right? It's not a natural feature of humans that women are subjugated, right? It is a feature of specifically of class society, and capitalism is just one of the iterations of that. So my talk will also really focus on how the book Capital gives us a crucial framework to even begin to understand our lives in our homes. In Capital, Marx centers the relationship between production and reproduction in his explanation of how capitalism works and how surplus value is generated. And so by putting social reproduction, everything I mentioned just now, right, cooking, cleaning, looking after kids, by putting social reproduction at the heart of its analysis, Capital was likely one of the first and only books to so thoroughly center women's often invisible labor in its explanation of how politics and economics work. Now, not many people actually think that when you're in academic spaces, and that's a big part of my motivation for writing this talk, because Marx gets a lot of criticism, and just Marxists in general get a lot of criticism, specifically from the academy, about perpetuating sexist and racist assumptions, even while maybe espousing liberatory doctrines, or that's the accusation. Marx is accused of overlooking the woman worker or the racialized worker's experience because he maybe centers the male proletariat factory worker. And as people interested in this stuff, we've probably heard that before. And as we'll see in a moment, these critiques are dumbfounding because they're based on nothing, as Derek was saying. And if I'm being honest, I too held these critiques of Marx in the past, maybe when I was an undergrad, specifically when I was writing my senior thesis on this very topic, mainly because I didn't actually closely read Capital. But now that I have, one really finds that by studying Marx's words, as we will do a little bit in this talk, in addition to not only Marx's words, but also the long tradition of folks who have continued to deepen and extend his analysis, we see that Marxism is the only tradition that is serious about understanding the full reality of working women's lives, and is the only analysis that can actually lead us and guide us to real material women's liberation. So one of the first things that we learn when it comes to studying social reproduction from a Marxist perspective is that the family is a site of economic activity and exploitation. So the family in itself is an economic unit, and that's something that Marx and Engels revealed to us early on in their work. So the word, for example, family in itself comes from the Latin word familia, which translates to the total number of slaves belonging to one man. And it also comes from the word familus, which literally translates to domestic slave. So Marx used this language of comparing the wife's status within the house to being that of a domestic slave in Capital. Volume 1 is he writes that, I'm going to quote it, previously, the worker sold his own labor power, which he disposed of as a free agent, formally speaking. Now he sells his wife and child. He has become a slave dealer, end quote. So here Marx is talking in the context of how when women entered the workforce, they would earn a wage, of course, but that wage was taken by their husband, who then becomes no less than a slave dealer, specifically in economic terms. And Marx and Engels also are known for critiquing the institution of marriage, specifically because of the effect it has on women, making them isolated into homes, producing nothing but dusted couches and clean floors. For example, they write that, quote, the bourgeois sees in his wife a mere instrument of production and nothing more. So basically there's a history of how we got here. And I recommend, of course, that everyone read The Origin of the Family, Private Property in the State, because I could never do it justice. But in it, Engels documents how the emergence of private property created classes long ago, before even feudalism existed. So the emergence of private property created classes out of what was previously collective, indigenous, more communal communities that were also maternally organized. But due to certain material conditions, surplus goods were created for the first time, and men seized upon that surplus and made it private property. They overthrew the mother right in order to control and maintain property within the father's line. And this is called the world historical defeat of the female sex, at least by Engels. But it's not just in this history that we see the Marxist canon pay attention to women's exploitation, but the very core analysis in Capital centers reproduction in a crucial way. So Marx was the one who said that reproduction is the reason that labor exists, and then labor is the reason that value and profit exist in society. Chapter 6, for example, lays out how the value of labor power has to be daily produced by cooking, cleaning, and by consuming goods so that a worker can reproduce himself. But the thing is that when you read these passages, Marx is not writing in a vocabulary of cultural or feminist studies. And I think that's key because he's not using phrases and terms that would typically remind us of feminism from an academic standpoint or intellectual standpoint. And yet, Capital, I would say, offers a much deeper skeletal infrastructure that is needed to conduct any study of working women's lives, specifically when it comes to unpaid domestic work. And that's because we need to understand unpaid domestic work in a context of history, of the rise of class society, and of capitalism, and why this work is not only necessary, but also made invisible in this weirdly deliberate way. And this is also why struggles have for a long time drawn on Marxism to make unpaid labor visible for reproductive justice struggles in a capitalistic society that is insistent upon undervaluing it. I'll wrap up now by suggesting some possible solutions that people, when they think about the crisis of social reproduction support, there's three. So the first one I want to talk about is sharing the labor more equally amongst maybe a husband and wife or two partners or just a family. The second one is something perhaps some people have heard of or perhaps not, which is the wages for housework movement. And then the last one is industrializing and socializing housework. So many of us can probably relate to the call for households to more equally divide the workload. So specifically relieving women, right, of the overwhelming burden of reproducing all the workers in the house, including herself, most likely. And of course, I support this call because relief is important and because of the principle of equality. However, that sharing housework in itself can never be a complete solution. And that's because of the realities of the hardships that working families face. There are people with disabilities, older people who live alone, and families that are simply too overburdened and exploited to have that be a sustainable solution for all of society. I mean, many of us grew up in chaotic households like that. So more is needed. And a second solution people often offer is, or suggest, is the wages for housework movement. And that's something everyone should Google because it has a very interesting history in which women, starting, I believe, in Italy, argued that women who perform housework or raise children should be paid a wage for their contributions to capitalism. How exactly that would work is debated, but the key would be including housework into formal labor relations from which it has always been kept invisible. And now, while there are progressive elements to this call, it can never be the extent of the solution because upon interviewing working women, it becomes pretty clear pretty fast that women don't want to be tied and isolated to the home forever and now get paid a wage for it. It would simply codify and legalize an exploitation that's already ongoing. So then I'll just end on a revolutionary solution that comrades, Marxist women have supported for a long time, and that is the socialization of housework. Angela Davis called it the abolition of housework. And that's because it's the abolition of housework as we know it, right? As being something that each family has to fend for themselves, fight to live, to see another day, to put dinner on the table and fund all of this. So socialization would mean that society and the state is responsible for its people and meeting their basic needs rather than the, I guess, leading mother or leading woman or individuals in each family to be responsible for. So this call recognizes the need for the state and society to take on the burden of housework and to not leave individual families to fend for themselves. It will look like cooking, cleaning, and laundry be taken out of the home and become the responsibility of organizations and associations of workers. And I just want to end on a quote because when I was doing my senior thesis a couple years ago, which is the project that got me interested in, or that the project in which I guess I expressed my interest in this topic, I had the privilege of interviewing some comrades here in our branch here in Chicago. And when I asked one of the comrades who is a young worker and an organizer with us, when I asked them about what this industrialization would look like, right? Because it is a very foreign concept to most. This is what they said, and then I'll be done. They said, I mean, it's always hard to imagine what it is going to look like after capitalism, because who knows about the exact conditions and everything. But when I think about it, like personally, from that perspective, I think a lot more things should be public or organized in the interest of the public, instead of so much falling to individual families. I'm thinking more communal minded when it comes to childcare and stuff. That it's not just a family unit, the nuclear family that is alone responsible for making sure everything is running, but that there is a lot more support coming from the state or from your neighborhood or maybe your local community. Making sure that everyone has a cooked meal every day. That's one thing I personally like the idea of, is having communal kitchens. Just having options that you could do it on your own if you like, but a more effective way would always be possible for people to do it together. So that's the end of that. But here, my comrade, I think really helps us to begin to visualize and imagine what a solution like this could look like. But it is a solution that would have to come hand in hand with a much deeper transformation of society, could come hand in hand with the abolition of capitalism and the establishment and defense of a state that really does prioritize and center working people's basic needs. And it is a world we would have to fight for. And I'll end on that.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto Group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.